The views expressed in this podcast are solely those of the podcast host and guest and do not necessarily represent those of our distribution partners, supporting business relationships, or supported audience. Welcome to Transacting Value, where we talk about practical applications for instigating self-worth when dealing with each other and even within ourselves, where we foster a podcast listening experience that lets you hear the power of a value system, from managing burnout, establishing boundaries, fostering community, and finding identity. My name is Josh Porthouse. I'm your host, and we are redefining sovereignty of character. This is why values still hold value. This is Transacting Value.
You know, it's really up to us as patients and humans to own our health and be armed with knowledge and stand up for ourselves whenever we are put in a position like this.
This next conversation is not medical advice. Consult your primary care provider prior to any treatment changes. Today on Transacting Value, who can you trust when a misdiagnosis makes you think you're crazy? Or medical professionals come and cause you to question the validity of your own self-awareness. We're talking with a podcast host and founder of Rebel Health Collective about finding the right doctor, asking critical questions, and navigating medical care to reinvigorate your sense of self. His name is Josh Bostick. Guys, I'm Josh Porthouse. I'm your host, and from SDYT Media, this is Transacting Value. Josh, what's up, man? How you doing?
Doing well. I got a full cup of coffee and another Josh on the line, so I can't complain. How about you?
I just did the same thing. As a matter of fact, just did the same thing. But dude, yeah, I really appreciate it, man. I watched a couple of your episodes and conversations earlier today on your channel, and you've got something interesting happening. I think it's like you're not just having conversations about health and diagnoses. You're talking resources and perspectives and stories and depth. Like, take a couple minutes here in the beginning. Let's do this. Who are you? For anybody who's unfamiliar, where are you from? You know, what sort of things are shaping your perspective and brought you around to all these things?
Sure. Yeah. I think, if you would have asked me that 3 years ago, I would have started off with my profession and some of my hobbies as being who I am and what I identify as. But today, I am a father and a husband. Those are the four most important things in my life. And the last 3 years have really shaped that and really transformed my outlook and really what I'm all about. I mean, I want to be a good employee. I want to keep my job. I want to be a good neighbor. But my son and my wife are the most important things in my life. And they're my why as to why my values have changed and why, I guess, really my perspective on myself have changed. So if anyone asks me, that's who I am. Those are the two most important things to me. But I'm out in Fort Worth, Texas. So, right kind of in the heart of North Texas. I work for a government contracting company for the DoD. And, really, I'm an advocate too. That's probably my biggest identity that made me want to start the podcast and Rebel Health Collective as a whole.
And what is Rebel Health Collective? Just a catchy name and it sort of flows nice, or did it come from somewhere?
It came from my 3 years and the experience that I've gone through. I would say that going into the last 3 years, I was someone that did, the yearly annual blood workup, went to the ER or, the quick med ER places when I had the flu or something like that. But I was probably the average American in their medical knowledge and influence in the system. But Rebel Health Collective came from working outside the norms. It's stories and community and information that you don't hear in the four walls of a doctor's office. And there's many reasons why you don't hear that. And to your point earlier, that's a lot of what I'm trying to bring out and build a community around is advocates, people who are truly going through it and have stories to tell, tips to give, and experiences to share, and just transferring that knowledge and creating a place where people can find others. It may not be someone that's going through the exact same chronic illness, disease, mental health issue, anything like that. It's just building a community of people are going through things and a safe space to bounce ideas off.
Okay. So you mentioned 3 years ago a couple times. What's so special about 3 years ago?
So 3 years ago, I went in and, as I mentioned, did my normal annual blood workup. Was
Hmm.
expecting things to come back as the same as they had before. Maybe cholesterol's a little high, nothing out of the ordinary. But I actually got a call from a nurse saying, you need to go to the ER right now. Like, whatever you're doing, drop it and go to the ER. My blood sugar was near 400 at the time of the blood draw. And then my A1C was 12.7. So almost 13. And the average American, like where they want it at, is between 5.4 and 5.6. So definitely
What does that?
elevated.
Yeah. What does that indicate?
That indicates, well, can potentially be type 2 diabetes, but in a lot of instances, it's type 1 diabetes.
Whoa. Okay. Because insulin's not breaking down sugars.
Correct. Yeah. So,
Uh-huh.
it can be the two where you're just extremely insulin resistant, and you can usually see that trend over time. Over several years, your blood work in A1C is going to start trending upwards to a higher number. But from 2019 to 2020, my A1C just skyrocketed overnight. So definitely indicated that my pancreas wasn't producing insulin through the beta cells and had some autoimmune issues going on.
Whoa. Wow. And so that started this whole journey for you individually. And that's also where this picked up then for Rebel Health Collective?
Correct. Yeah. So that's the
Hmm.
first time that, my eyes were opened up to a different side of the medical system. And really that stems with that first night in the ER. I was misdiagnosed right off the bat because of
Oh,
my
really?
age. Yeah, because of my
Oh,
age and my build, they basically said it can't be type 1, it's type 2. They gave me some metformin, which is a drug that helps lower your blood sugar. And, I had asked, do I need to get like a glucose meter, check my glucose, or anything like that? And the answer is basically no, just take this medication and you'll be fine. And that was the guidance I was giving. Nothing more on diet, exercise, things I can do. Just take these pills and you'll be okay.
okay. Now, is that really a shock, though? I mean, for everybody that goes into the ER or the hospital or to see their doctor, of all the people that they see, they got to play to the average, I guess, to start for a baseline because everybody's so different. You know what I mean? Was it that big of a, not the diagnosis? That's a shock, but the process itself, the revelation.
I don't think necessarily like someone going into the ER with the numbers that I had. I mean, that wasn't out of the norm or anything crazy. But I
Mm.
think the fact that it was just a one size fit all, whatever that doctor's experience was, that was what was kind of cast over me. There wasn't
Mm.
any individual treatment to it. They didn't say, let's run some other tests. I mean, there's blood work that you can do to say exactly that it's type 1 diabetes. And, like,
Mm.
why didn't we potentially run that when I was there? And, essentially I walked out of the hospital and had thought about the urgency that nurse had and the treatment that I'd gotten from the ER, and things just didn't really line up. So I
Oh, I
typed
see.
in type 1 diabetes and Google brought up, a list of symptoms, and I checked every single one of them. And those weren't talked about in the ER. We didn't walk through any of those. It was just, your blood sugar's high. Here's some medication.
What does that do to your outlook? I mean, that's like not the prognosis, I guess. I'm sure that was pretty debilitating for a few days at minimum, but like the process itself, it's you don't even know your body as well as somebody else who's not in it. You know what I mean? That to me seems pretty eye opening.
It was, yeah. And I think that's what made me start realizing that I've got to advocate for myself
Yeah.
and really, if something doesn't make sense, speak up. And I'm not trying to discredit doctors by any mean. I mean, they do an extraordinary job. They have a ton on their plate. They have an education that there's no way I could ever complete. So by no means trying to knock anything from doctors, but it's really up to us as patients and humans to own our health and be armed with knowledge and stand up for ourselves whenever we are put in a position like this. My gut feeling sitting on that bed was, I need at least more knowledge than just take this medication. At a minimum, if it would have been type 2 diabetes, I would have liked to have like a more in-depth conversation, and I shouldn't have left until I was fulfilled with that. And just from my prior medical experience, that's, I took it for what the doctor said and was on my way.
Alrighty, folks, sit tight and we'll be right back on Transacting Value.
Pass it on. Here's my bucket list for the day. Read an article on a news subject. Say only nice things about others. And listen to everyone's opinions. Because making things better requires change. Now, these changes aren't going to show up on your news feed, but they're things I can do. So change something today. It's not going to change the entire world, but it's going to change your world. Change is in you. Pass it on. From passiton.com.
At a minimum, if it would have been type 2 diabetes, I would have liked to have like a more in-depth conversation, and I shouldn't have left until I was fulfilled with that. And just from my prior medical experience, that's, I took it for what the doctor said and was on my way.
Well, you have every reason to trust the doctor, I think. Let's just say as a baseline here in the United States, you have every reason to trust the doctor. But then I think you're bringing up a good point. The ownership of informed consent falls to you, not the person presenting it, right? They're accountable for it, obviously, to tell you what's
Totally.
going on. And, here's the end user license agreement for your treatment or whatever. But if you scroll to the bottom and hit OK, well, now it's on you.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. But I also think about, you brought up concerns. You said yourself, you brought up, are we sure? Do I need to do anything else? Is there anything else I could try first? These types of considerations. Did you feel heard? How much do you say it before you're futile?
It goes back to what you just mentioned. I brought up the concerns, but, for whatever reason, his past experiences, other diagnoses that he'd given patients he'd seen, he was confident with his answers. And, I asked the questions. He gave me a confident answer back. I was like, okay, sure. Because he is a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
You do trust what they're saying. And, I think that is the way it should be. We shouldn't go around questioning every single thing a doctor says by any means. But, in that case, he stood by what he was saying and I believed him.
Yeah. Well, and there's nothing wrong with that. We have a saying, most of my career has been in the infantry in the Marine Corps. And this may be Corps wide, this may be DoD wide, maybe out to the contractors. I don't know. But trust but verify is a philosophy that floats around and permeates this entire military subculture. This sounds like one of those opportunities where, as long as you have the awareness to verify or know where to look, or just come up with a couple questions even to more critically evaluate the accuracy of somebody else's assessment, you might have been better sooner, or at least more in control sooner. Is that
Exactly.
accurate?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. And I think that comes to the Googling when I was walking out of the parking lot. It was a trust but verify. I trust what he was saying, but something in my gut didn't seem right.
Yeah.
And all the symptoms lined up. So I was like, I should go see a specialist. Like, I need to go see an endocrinologist that sees patients like me every single day, is accustomed to the blood work and tests that you can do to dig deeper into a diagnosis and whatnot. And that's when I, made a specialist appointment and ultimately got the actual type 1 diagnosis.
Mm. I've heard that before too. Going to see your primary care or general practitioner is good if you have something generic. But if you have something that doesn't seem to be as ordinary as a common cold or something to that effect, a broken bone, consider somebody that specializes in it,
Definitely. Yeah. And with the ER, my look on it now is when you go to the ER, you have a limb that's hanging off and their goal is to keep you alive. They're not trying to be a specialist for you for the next several years. They're trying to make sure that you walk out of there and have a pulse.
Yeah.
So also something to consider when you're going into a doctor's office, what is their specialty and what are you trying to get out of it?
Well, that's important too. Yeah. Education goes a long way. Self-awareness, obviously on one hand, but the practical application on the other. And I don't know where that's taught outside of specialized medicinal schools like nursing programs or whatever, to say, Well, for example, this is the role of an emergency room in any city planning consideration or medical trauma triage type process. But yeah, you're exactly right. We have a similar philosophy where if anybody gets injured, shot, or whatever happens, right, the first thing that has to happen is get them off the X. That's the expression that generally stands out with every branch. Well, and maybe even outside the military. But the idea is whatever the injury is, do what you need to in the most immediate sense. If you can't get it done within the first couple seconds, and it doesn't need to be done within a couple seconds, get them out of the way first, out of the kill box or whatever's happening, the kinetic environment, and then troubleshoot, right? And if, for example, all sorts of training programs for special forces and combat arms professionals in any branch to stabilize people enough to then get them to emergency care, from combat trauma to emergency care, from emergency care to some sort of stable, well, relatively more stable facility, and then whatever recovery and physical therapy after that. It's all a continuum, I guess is the right word. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where is that? I mean, you're becoming somewhat of the resource guy. Where's the place that we can say, or is there a place that we can say, okay, this place, maybe not by name, but in capacity, does these things? These places do these things. Or is that just in conversation and we just have to talk to each other?
I think it's in conversation, again, just owning your health. I mean, I think there's so many platforms, my podcast, a lot of what you have going on with your podcast. I mean, it's real people. You definitely have doctors and experts and, SMEs. But at the same time, you have just random real people who want to tell their story and have things to give. And honestly, that's where I have found the most helpful information, and the people who have spent the most time to help me is on some of those deep, dark holes of the internet. I mean, Reddit has been my best source of diabetic information. I've had people get on Zoom calls, phone calls, FaceTimes, and we've talked for an hour and a half, 2 hours. And they've told me what's worked for them, tips and tricks. And they always caveat with, this may not work for you, but this is my experience. And it's someone who's really going through it. They're jabbing themselves multiple times a day with insulin. They're pricking their fingers. They're having pumps that aren't working. And, those are the sources that just have led me to control my diabetes so much better. And that's what my goal with Rebel Health is to have that kind of a community and resource for people to reach out to.
Yeah, that is pretty interesting. And I imagine it's a fair bit fulfilling.
It is, yeah.
Just the role that you're able to fill on one hand, coming obviously firsthand experience, coming from what's wrong with me? Why is nothing working? What is happening? And whatever amount of questions come with that, to then, oh, finally, now I've got some respite, to then, nope, never mind, that was wrong. I'm back where I started. And then to get slingshot into the foreground of, this is totally not what I was expecting, or whatever research you have to do, I assume, with nothing but a pamphlet or a trifold something, and then your own research skills, right? So where did you even start? How do you manage all those things mentally, let alone digitally?
So when I did get the type 1 diagnosis, there are resources and trainings that they put you through. And, there's pamphlets and there's dietary education courses, things like that. And I'd gone through all that and it just wasn't working. I was doing all the things that they told me to do, but my blood sugar was still going all over the place. It was going super high. And then I was going super low to the point where I was kind of getting dizzy and almost passing out throughout the day. And I had a breaking point, and it always gets to me, but my wife was out on work travel. And so my son had just been born. He was probably 4 months old at the time. And we'd had dinner. I'd done too much insulin for the meal that I had. And my numbers started just kind of plummeting. They're going straight down. I could feel the dizziness and the shaking coming on. And I just knew I've got to put my son somewhere. I'm not safe to hold him. I can't take care of him. I've got to put him somewhere safe and, get over this low. And so I ended up putting him in his crib, just sitting backwards to his crib, listening to him just crying, as an infant does, and just sitting there feeling completely helpless, not able to care for my son.
Ooh.
And at that point, I was just like, this can't happen. This isn't who I want to be. This isn't the dad I want to be. And I started flashing through, like basketball practice, baseball practices, things like that. And just thought that there has to be another way. Like whatever I'm doing is not working, and I'm trying to do what's been told. And that's when I really started looking into other groups, support groups, people's experiences, podcasts, and things like that, to start taking practical steps into other people who are fighting this disease and this lifestyle.
Alrighty, folks, sit tight and we'll be right back on Transacting Value.
Join us for Transacting Value, where we discuss practical applications of personal values every Monday at 9 a.m. on our website, transactingvaluepodcast.com, Wednesdays at 5 p.m. and Sundays at noon on wreathsacrossamerica.org/radio.
And that's when I really started looking into other groups, support groups, people's experiences, podcasts, and things like that, to start taking practical steps into other people who are fighting this disease and this lifestyle.
Yeah, that is difficult for sure. I remember, not in the exact circumstance you had, but very similarly, a point where I had got so wrapped up in my own anxiety and depression and processing all my own things, and I didn't know what else to do about it. Interestingly, I also turned to podcasting, but initially hosting before listening. And it became my therapy. And so I started talking to people and working through it, because what I started to realize was, the more I was trying to communicate with my son, we were long distance and he was older than yours, but we started to communicate more often. But all I could think about was work. I couldn't detach. I couldn't communicate effectively. And the only thing I kept coming back to was, is this the kind of person that I want to be when he's old enough to remember these conversations? Similar sort of circumstance, which you were describing, dude. And it's a powerful motivator. They say,
It is.
They say your big why generally revolves around your big who. And I think that exactly exemplifies it, man. And to have that kind of closure, I think, to know that you're not going crazy in the process, that you're actually making some headway, counts for a lot. But I think when you can attribute it and tie it to, I feel better, but I actually know it's going to make our family a more stronger unit and better for him as he's growing up, and for your wife, and just to take not only that kind of ownership, but be able to take that kind of ownership and then do something with it, do something about it. What a cool feeling that must have been.
It was. And as you mentioned, when I started seeing that my blood sugar was leveling out, my numbers were getting better, my A1C was going down, I realized that I was starting to do so many more things that I wasn't able to do before. I was getting on the ground. I was being much more interactive with him. I kind of went from this like couch potato, kind of just not excited about anything, to being really motivated and just wanting to get back to normal. And I hadn't had that really before that rock bottom.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's cool too. And I'm not even familiar with all of the symptoms as it applies to diabetes. Is this a primary topic on your show, or what you want your primary topic to be? Or
I mean, it definitely comes up a good bit, just because it is something that I live with every day. But no, it's not, type 1, type 2 diabetes as a whole focused. I mean, we've had different guests with different illnesses on. We've got a bunch of people lined up, with lupus, different cancers, different rare diseases. So, I mean, it's kind of all over, but it's trying to spread information for anyone who might be, interested in lupus or something like that. Just a resource to hear someone's true story, not so much a sciencey, white paper reading, but a real life experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, what is this doing for your insight into maybe medical facilities or medical training? I mean, is this diminishing it, enhancing it, helping it, hurting it? What is that? Hearing all these stories and all these experiences, what does that do for you?
A little bit of everything.
Okay.
There's a lot of stories that are similar to mine, misdiagnoses, people going several years without being able to get a diagnosis. But then, I've also talked to some amazing doctors who are up to the latest and greatest trainings and techniques that are coming out. And, there's doctors who are incorporating things that push what they're being taught in medical school. So, it's brought hope in that sense that there are a lot of good doctors out there who are trying to do new techniques, advance their skills and things like that. But it's also brought to light a lot of people who have struggled over the years due to the medical system as well, just from not having the right resources, the right support, or knowing where to go or how to advocate for themselves. We have a lot of people right now who go into a doctor's office and are just given pills that mask the symptoms. And by no means am I knocking Western medicine, because there's a lot of great, prescriptions and things out there that I think are 100% necessary. Whenever you go to the doctor, when's the last time they ask about your sleep, your diet, your lifestyle, your activities, your hobbies? I mean, those are important things that we don't think about as medicine anymore. And that's one of the big things that I'm trying to push is, the functional side of medicine and health, where getting out in the sunlight, going for walks with your significant other, spouses, family, those kind of connections and community that just we don't focus on, cooking dinner instead of picking up McDonald's, the nutritional value of the food that we're eating, all that kind of stuff is things that we don't talk about in the doctor's office and those four walls that I really think are lacking and what are leading to a lot of the problems that we're having.
Is that a luxury though? Do you think being able to have those conversations, just because it is a business, they're trying to cycle bodies through and help as many people as they can. Is that a luxury?
I think it's looked at as one, but it shouldn't be. I think it should be the root of where things are happening. I mean, when you go in with symptoms, you get a prescription to take care of those symptoms. Mm-hmm. But what if those symptoms are coming from a food allergy, but you never talk about your diet? You're just going to be taking a prescription that could easily be fixed by not eating a certain food group, seafood, gluten, things like that. I mean, with my diet, I have cut out gluten. And it's cleared up so many different things, and it's made my blood sugar so much more stable. So weird things like that. And because I talked to somebody on Reddit that said you should do the AIP diet. It's like a exclusionary diet where you cut out all the high trigger foods, you slowly introduce them back in. And as you see symptoms come back, that could be a potential trigger.
I've heard of something similar like that, but for, I think it was magnesium or something in seafood. I had a friend where she did something similar. She just scaled everything back and then slowly introduced it back in. Yeah. And obviously, in not every case is that effective, or obviously medical advice for everyone, but yeah, it's definitely an option. Sure. Just as much as anything else could be. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a resource that we could be using in the doctor's office that doesn't cost anything. Some of the prescriptions that people are on are really, really expensive. And why not try some, natural things that we can be incorporating into our lifestyle to potentially bring back some of the symptoms or, causes that we're seeing.
Sure. But then medicine or your diagnosis got this started. I mean, that was the catalyst. Is this a new interest for you though? Healthcare, wellness, or was this always a hobby of yours and sort of an outlet or a fascination? Or
I would have never in a million years imagined that I had a podcast talking about healthcare transformation and like health advocacy. Never, ever in a million years. And, really my diagnosis initially didn't kick this off either. I just thought, I'll do insulin, I'll follow what they're saying. And it wasn't working. And it wasn't until I met some of the people on the internet and different forums that really took so much time out of their day just for no reason other than to help a random stranger, that I started to understand how little information there is in the medical system and some of those, education systems that you go through, just because there's so many people going through it. They do have such a time crunch, and doctors can't spend 2 hours with you. They just can't, as much as they probably want to. Like you said, there's a business, and a lot of them these days don't own the practice. So, even if they truly want to, which I think most 99% of them do, they just can't. And so meeting all these people and advocates, I got so much out of it, and they gave my life back in such a way that I didn't think was going to be possible, that I want to try and do my part and continue that on.
I think that's an important aspect to know too. I mean, on one hand, as far as doctors and nurses go, right, first, do no harm. So I doubt it's intentionally neglecting or willful omission, but I think there is a certain necessity as we get older, just as people, as we grow through life, to be able to make our own decisions, not take everything at face value. And so it's important. Yeah, I agree, to have different options. And sometimes, like you just brought up, crowdsourcing opinion doesn't hurt anything. In fact, I think oftentimes it can be helpful depending on what it is you're soliciting, I suppose.
Yeah. And I mean, you're definitely going at it on your own risk when you do crowdsourcing. The doctors are going to be providing safe protocol that is proven, that the FDA approves and things like that. So when you do crowdsourcing or, do something by talking to someone through a forum or group, I mean, you're taking that risk upon yourself. And that's definitely something that you need to be aware of, Think through the advice that people are giving you. But for instance, my endo and I were talking at my last appointment, and, we go through my charts and see why my numbers are going up and down. And he brought up one occasion and he goes, "What happens here? Your numbers were so good." I said, "I gave a presentation. Whenever I get stressed out, my numbers, the cortisol your body releases, it generates glucose. And so my numbers just skyrocket, and no amount of insulin will bring it down until that stressor's over." I mean, I was looking at my watch before coming on with you, and my numbers were creeping up. So, and he had no idea that, a stressful situation like that could increase your blood sugar numbers. So it's things like that. But if you ask most diabetics, they know for a fact that an event like that will raise your numbers.
Interesting.
So it's just a matter of, what they're taught in school, and then people who are living with it every single day.
Sure. Well, yeah. And then I guess that's why they call it an educated guess. Yeah.
Right. Definitely.
Sure. Okay. Well, so then let's talk about you for a second, because you said just a couple minutes ago, not in a million years would I have thought I'd be doing a podcast like this about all of these different types of healthcare and wellness considerations. Why not? What was the polar opposite, or what was the difference? Who were you back then?
I was the person who, was relatively healthy, could mountain bike, could go run. I did my annual healthcare checkup, and everything usually checked out fine. I had no reason to know the other side of what people can deal with, and, and the struggles that come with chronic illness and mental health and, just cancer and some of that stuff. I had never been privy to that world.
I get it now. Okay. Yeah. I thought it was like an actual aversion to having a show about health and wellness. You just meant because it wasn't a consideration.
Wasn't a blimp on the radar by any means.
Yeah. Okay, I see. Well, now then, while we are talking about you, this is a pretty good time for this segment of the show called Developing Character.
Developing Character.
And it's two questions. For everybody who's new to the show, the idea behind this is because my working theory is that values are a shortcut to identity and relationships and conversation and all of the self-awareness that comes with those things, to the exact point and reason you're bringing up. Sometimes it will literally save your life. And so I'm curious, now you're in a position where you have this kind of authority and resourcefulness and accountability to your audience. And so my question about your values is twofold. One of them is how all of this got started. So what were some of the values that you were raised around, or that you remember being brought up around?
My dad had always constantly driven into us, do the right thing when no one's looking. And, that's picking up the piece of trash that you walk by and there's a trash can right there. It's not throwing something out the window of your car. It's helping someone when they're down, and not doing it for the credit or applause, but just because it's truly the right thing. And I think that's really driven me to start this health transformation community is, I'm not doing it to make money. I probably never will make money off this. And that's not the goal. It's to spread the information. And, if I could do it faceless and not put my face on here, I'd prefer to do it that way. That'd be the goal. But it's just to help others without any credit or monetary reason behind it, other than people did it for me when I was down and turned my life around. So it's just the opportunity to do that to them.
Sweet. Yeah. Well, I'm glad it carried through because, like I told you before we started recording, I think a lot of the material you're putting out and working to put together to be able to showcase is 100% worthwhile. And you never know what you're going to come across that's going to help somebody else, or vice versa, where you're going to come across information that might help you. So then, now though, after talking to everybody in your life, personally, on your show, everywhere, what about now? I mean, have any of your values changed? Have you identified more of them that you prioritize higher or that you want to pass on to your son or anything like that?
I think one thing that has changed for me is I was one who always put others before myself. Definitely the people pleasing mentality. But through this experience and working with my wife, I've really realized that, there's times where I have to put myself first. When I've had a really long day with her, or not with her, I've had a really long day, I need to communicate with her and say like, hey, I'm at like 40%. I need you to pick up the other 60% with our son tonight. And telling her that, I can't do it all. I'm having a bad day, and taking the time for me to be able to recharge and get back to where I need to be to help her around the house and do my job and be there for our son. And, a lot of the things that we've come to as well is our circle's gotten smaller. We don't go out and we say no a lot more. And I think that's made a big difference as well. Whereas before we felt like we owed an obligation to go out to someone's event just because we got invited. But nowadays, we kind of focus on our family and us more, where if we've had a long week and we need a weekend just to hang out at the house, that's okay. You can say no. And so I think, through fighting through this disease and figuring out this lifestyle, that's really led both of us to step back from the people pleasing and, advocate for ourselves and our needs and putting our family first.
Alrighty, folks, sit tight and we'll be right back on Transacting Value.
This message is from the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. VA disability compensation is a monthly tax-free payment to veterans who got sick or injured in the military and to veterans whose service worsened an existing condition. You may qualify for VA disability compensation for physical and mental health conditions that developed or worsened due to service. Learn more at va.gov/disability.
Fighting through this disease and figuring out this lifestyle, that's really led both of us to step back from the people pleasing and, advocate for ourselves and our needs and putting our family first.
Yeah. And self-advocacy, not for nothing, is usually pretty low on people's radar. It's we have the same sort of, I guess, similar concept in the Marine Corps, right? Where there's no individuals. So if you're trying to do whatever, take care of yourself first, what makes you so special? Okay, forget the other guy, huh? All these types of comments that are prejudicial to good order and discipline. You try to take that with you, maybe inadvertently, after your career's over and move past it. And that aspect of your identity is tough to reconcile with. Like in your case, you didn't have a choice but to learn to take care of yourself first until you found a better balance. And I think that's tricky to come to grips with for a lot of people. How did you start to work through that? Like, obviously, aside from a health need, but making peace with that, accepting, okay, I can come first sometimes.
It was having so many bad days. They just would stack up, and it was, day after day after day of trying to do events or go places and do things that were just wearing me out. And then ultimately, wearing my wife out, because we get home and I would just be useless. And then she'd be having to pick up the slack, taking care of the dogs, taking care of our son, cleaning up around the house. And it was taking a toll on her as well, just because I wasn't able to be there as support.
Mm. So then you guys, figured it out on your own just by chance?
Yeah. I mean, no, it was communication between the two of us, just saying, this isn't working. Like, why are we in this state? And it was definitely before I'd figured out how to manage my blood sugar and diabetes better, but it was, why are we in this state? And it was because we were running ourselves ragged, trying to go to, grandparents' houses so that they could see our son, going to friends' birthdays, going to weddings, going to work events, happy hours, all those kind of things, rather than just kind of taking it easy and being our little family unit at times.
Well, that may not be easy either at times, but
no. And that's what I mentioned, where our circle's kind of gotten smaller. For the people that didn't really put an effort in to be around for us, or, when we were kind of hermiting to our house, that didn't make an effort to come over and hang out, they just kind of eventually faded off. It wasn't like a hard cutout, but the circle just kind of got smaller.
That's okay too. Yeah, that's okay too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that advocacy you were talking about on behalf of yourself in your individual life, or yourselves as a family unit, or professionally, anybody else in any career, nobody's going to look out for your endeavors to the same extent that you will. You got supporters, you've got cheerleaders, grandparents, right? But it's different. It's different. And I think if for no other reason than that, having some degree of that informed consent or education or understanding how to research a little bit and knowing where some resources are to find answers or to find options, I think that's why it makes all the difference, because in the end, it is just you advocating for you, because nobody else knows you like you do. Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely.
So, okay, for the sake of time, I really only have two more questions for you. And this one might be a little bit deeper than we've dug so far, but I'm curious because with the amount of initial misdiagnoses, confusion that you had around your own symptoms, let alone what the medical staff had around your symptoms, what to do about that, how to adjust your family, how to have these conversations with people. Hey, watch out for these things. Help me out if you notice this, whatever. All of these things that you went through and worked through, you have no choice but to make yourself heard or you die. So that's a pretty lofty reason, I think, a pretty high bar to make sure your point gets across clearly. But in the events when it doesn't, like we said, the diagnosis, for example, and you start to question, am I the one who's crazy here? Like I'm feeling these things. Can somebody at least give me a little validation, even if it's just a polite thought, something? What does that do to your worth? All of these things now. Has it changed how you view your own self-worth now?
Yeah, I think it does. And I mean, that kind of goes back to not being so much of the people pleasing and understanding that, if it wasn't the diabetes, and for those that aren't going through some kind of like a medical illness, diagnosis, things like that,
Yeah.
I think we're all going to eventually hit that rock bottom. It's going to be you're back up against the crib, listening to your child cry in whatever situation you want to put it in. If you're devoting 90 hours to your job, eventually you're going to hit a point where it's not worth it. And you're going to look back and say, I wasted all these years with my family. I didn't go to my kids' games. I wasn't there for my dad when he was in the hospital, things like that. I think we're all going to hit a point eventually, and it's that turning point. And that's when you really understand your worth and your why, to what you mentioned earlier. I mean, from that point on, listening to my son cry, I knew from then on, whatever it took for him and my wife to be happy and safe, that was my goal.
Pretty wild how that was the wake-up call, though, Like,
yeah. And it can be anything for anyone. It doesn't have to be something crazy or tragic. But I think once you hit that point and you're kind of like, wow, like this isn't who I thought I was going to be, how life was going to go, where I pictured myself being, listen to it and understand why you are there and what's making you come to that realization. I think that's where you find your worth and can turn it around.
Yeah, absolutely. And also from the other hand of that perspective, if it weren't for you getting your diagnosis, who's to say that you ever would have had that realization to prioritize differently and focus more on your family or not take things as granted as quickly or whatever? I mean,
Yeah. They,
sometimes those grounding experiences, let me say this, sometimes those reality experiences ground you, but for the better.
yeah,
Yeah.
totally. And to your point, if it wasn't the diabetes, who knows? It could have been 10 years from now and it could have been something else, getting fired from a job that I devoted my life to. Who knows when
Yeah.
or what it could be, but I'm sure it would have happened eventually. And I'm glad it did happen when it did so that I could, start now and focus on
Yeah.
what really matters to me.
Yeah, sure. Young enough to try to spring back and do something. Yeah, that's huge
Yeah.
too. Cool, man. So for anybody that wants to find out more, watch your conversations, listen to your podcast, Rebel Health Collective, where do we go, man? How do we actually find these resources you're providing?
Sure. So it's on all of them, the major streaming podcast platforms, on YouTube, got an Instagram, got a Facebook page, all of that. So just should be able to just search Rebel Health Collective wherever you get your information from, and hopefully we pop up there.
Sweet. Yeah, cool. Okay, so for anybody who's new to our show, you can go to transactingvaluepodcast.com. And if you're streaming the conversation there or any other platform you're playing this conversation on, click see more or click show more under the player for the conversation. And in the drop down, you'll see that description. In there, you'll also see links to Rebel Health Collective and Josh's Facebook and Instagram for the show as well. So you guys can track down the resources there. And since you're already here listening to him on the show anyways, you may as well go there and go straight to his and check it out after. So super cool, man. I appreciate your perspective. And next time when you come back on the show, which is a formal invitation, let's make it a little bit more deliberate instead of the overview, because there's a lot of questions I've got for you and not as much time right now to do it. But I really appreciate your time saying that and being able to step away from your evening and just talk for a little bit, albeit a little bit differently maybe than what you're used to on your show. But I do appreciate it. So thanks for your time.
No, and I really appreciate you having me. And again, I really appreciate the platform that you're building and have put out already. So I think you have really important conversations on here. And from the 10 or so episodes I've listened to, I've definitely taken away some good things. So appreciate everything that you're doing.
Well, thanks for listening to all 10. That's huge too, man. Feedback is such an interesting thing to try to come by and then understand what to do with it. So absolutely, any insight, any input you've got, I really appreciate it, let alone the support. And obviously for anybody else listening to the conversation who wants to leave feedback for us on our show, like I said, transactingvaluepodcast.com. On the homepage, on the top right corner, there's a leave a voicemail button. That's 2 minutes of audio to yourself. Let us know what you think about our show. Let us know what you think about this conversation, or give Josh some advice, give him some feedback, let him know what's going on, and we'll forward it to him as well. All about Rebel Health Collective. But for right now, I appreciate your time, Josh. I appreciate you guys tuning in and listening to the show and staying with us through the whole conversation. Check out more of them at transactingvaluepodcast.com. But until next time, that was Transacting Value.
Thank you to our show partners. And folks, thank you for tuning in and appreciating our value as we all grow through life together. To check out our other conversations, or even to contribute through feedback, follows, time, money, or talent, and to let us know what you think of the show, please leave a review on our website, transactingvaluepodcast.com. We also stream new episodes every Monday at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time through all of your favorite podcasting platforms like Spotify, iHeart, and TuneIn. You can now hear Transacting Value on Reads Across America Radio Eastern Standard Time, Wednesdays at 5 p.m., Sundays at noon, and Thursdays at 1 a.m. Head to readsacrossamerica.org/transactingvalue to sponsor a wreath and remember, honor, and teach the value of freedom for future generations. On behalf of our team and our global ambassadors, as you all strive to establish clarity and purpose, ensure social tranquility, and secure the blessings of liberty or individual sovereignty of character for yourselves and your posterity, we will continue instigating self-worth, and we'll meet you there. Until next time, that was Transacting Value.